That's one of the places that we're in right now with Revelation 13. So again, just to situate this, so we came to the end of chapter 11. The seventh trumpet sounded, which is the trumpet that indicates that Christ is taking over direct physical rule of the earth, and it just precedes when Christ returns. And so you have the final trumpet, which is going to unleash in rapid succession the bowl judgments, which then enable uh, the way for Jesus Christ to return. But there's questions as we come in between the trumpet sounding and picking up with what that actually triggers, where John is answering some questions. And he's answering questions about the holy war that is going on, the nature of it. He's addressing issues like, why does the judgment have to be so severe? And what should the believer be thinking in the midst of this? And so last week we looked at the holy war in historical perspective. So there was a trumpet sounds, pause. Let's look at the history that's gone on between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And so chapter 12 addresses that and how Satan has been seeking to destroy the seed of the woman. And in lieu of that, next best thing is destroying the woman herself. So you have this targeting of Israel, which is supernaturally prevented. Well, then we have, because as Israel is protected, the dragon is looking at what then can he attack. And so we have chapter 13, which describes from a human perspective what is going on during the time of Jacob's trouble, during the last 3.5 years of the tribulation. A lot of suffering, uh, a lot of anguish for the people of God. And yet here John is pulling back the curtain saying, this is what's actually going on. And this is what to expect. And when this does come, this is how you should think and respond to it. And we're going to see as we go through the type of tribulation that's described has a lot of correlation, again, with what some of the seven churches were facing, especially as they were tempted to either capitulate to the world system and maybe just offer just a little bit of incense to Caesar so that they could engage in economic discourse. We're going to see what God's perspective is on all that in chapter 13. So if you have the notes, you see, again, there's a whole bunch of imagery. And again, if you're walking in, I apologize that we don't have more notes, but the printer is being the printer again today. But a bunch of imagery, and you'll see if you have the notes, the majority of it ties back to Daniel chapter 7. So it's heavily pulled on in this passage here. So this chapter then describes how Satan is seeking to destroy all of God's people, describing and picturing the severity of the situation. So let's begin reading with chapter 13, and we'll do this in sections. So we'll start with what your translation may have as the very end of chapter 12, depending on which translation you have, or it may be the beginning of chapter 13, which is properly where it should be. So one of those kind of bad chapter breaks. So chapter 13, verse 1, and the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. Okay, so we'll pause there real quick because we're going to see when we continue on in this chapter, it breaks into two large sections that describe two significant beasts that takes place. So first of all, we have this dragon who is on the seashore, and the dragon, if you remember from last week, is Satan himself, okay, the one who has been fighting against the woman from the very beginning, the one who has the seven heads that represent the seven empires that have been opposed to Israel. Why does it say that he's standing on the sand of the seashore? When we think about this, there's a couple imagery things that are going on that's going to develop, but one of the things that's hit on here is the seashore. The sand of the seashore is the meeting place of both the land and the sea.
We're going to talking about the one in the last chapter.
Yeah.
Okay, not this one in
No,
chapter 13.
What is the very first phrase in chapter 13 in your translation?
Rising out of the
Okay, go back and read the last phrase of chapter 12.
Oh, it stood on the sand of the sea. Okay.
Yeah, and that's
where you are.
That's where, depending on the translation, you're going to have that either at the end of chapter 12 or the beginning of chapter 13.
Oh,
Because
that's what you
just
meant.
frankly, between you and me, and I was talking to someone about this last week, but if there was one thing I could do, like kind of go back and reset and everything, it would be, guys, could we go through the Bible and put the chapter divisions in better spots? Because there's some places where it's really, really great. And then there's some places where they put chapter breaks and verse breaks in horrendous positions. And this is one of them. Chapter breaks, not inspired. Those came about 1,000 years later to 1,200 years later. But here's the dragon. He is standing on the land. He's standing on the seashore, which is where the land and sea meet. And we're going to see there's coming a beast out of the sea and there's coming a beast out of the land. And this is significant because, okay, out of the land, out of the sea, and we're going to see this ties into Daniel, but when you see them coming, what is one of the things we've looked at from a few chapters ago that should be an encouragement to us? See a beast coming out of the sea, we're going to see. We've got a beast coming out of the land.
We have the angel with a foot in the sea and a foot on the land.
Okay, we have
sovereignty.
Chapter 10. We have this angel who is standing with 1 foot on the sea and 1 foot on the land, demonstrating absolute authority over both the sea and the land. And so now when we come here, and here's the dragon standing on the sand of the seashore, and we're going to see these two beasts rise up, one of the things that we should be thinking about is, okay, whatever happens, however horrible this looks, this is happening under the authority of Almighty God. And so that's an encouragement with everything that goes on. The dragon, Satan, is at the final evaluation God's Satan. And he is restrained in what he does by God himself. But then we have this section. We'll go ahead and read through verse 10. Then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 7 diadems, and on his head were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and the fatal wound was healed. And the whole world was amazed and followed after the beast. They worshiped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who is able to wage war with him?" And there was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given to him. And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. It was also given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Here is the perseverance in the faith of the saints. Okay, so that's the first beast. Let's take this because there's a lot of imagery here. There's a lot of Old Testament reference going on here. So let's unpack this a little bit and try to get a better view of what's going on here. So first of all, what he looks like. So Subpoint 1. First of all, he comes out of the sea. Now, in this culture, we think of the sea as, maybe you sit on the beach and you look out and you see the waves coming in and it's pretty and attractive. You can watch the sunset. That's not what is being highlighted here. This is for the Jewish people, especially, and for the world in general. The sea was a terrifying place. I mean, think you don't have electricity, you don't have GPS, your compasses are very, very rough if you have them at all. You're navigating by the stars, so if it's cloudy, you're not able to navigate. And if there's a really bad storm, which you don't know if there's bad storm coming because you don't have NOAA or you don't have the weather services that we have today, you very easily will die and lose everything. And you go more than about 2 feet under the surface and it gets dark and mysterious and you can't see what's under there. So there's sea monsters, there's terrifying things down there. And so when it says the beast comes out of the sea, he's describing the beast coming out of a place of terror and destruction. That's the imagery that's being pulled on. And actually, if you keep a finger there and flip back to Daniel 7, and you might want to put a bookmark there because we'll be going back and forth between Daniel 7 and Revelation 13. But in Daniel chapter 7, verse 3, we see Daniel's vision, and here he describes 4 great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. So here's these beasts who are going to wreak a lot of havoc on Israel, upon God's people, and they're described as coming up out of the sea. Not to jump ahead too much, but we're going to see the second beast rises up from the land. And that's in Revelation 13:11. I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. That's pulling from Daniel chapter 7, verse 17. When Daniel's getting the interpretation, he says, these great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings who will arise from the earth. Okay, so there's imagery going on that's being pulled from Daniel. These 4 beasts, which represent the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, and the Roman Empire, they arise both from the sea and from the land, which kind of gives this picture of the universality of their reign. They're taking over everything. There's also possibly a reference here, maybe a sideways reference to the very end of Job, because in Job chapter 40 chapter 40 and 41, we have these 2 beasts, Behemoth and Leviathan. One is from the land, one is from the sea. Both of them are dangerous. Both of them are uncontrollable, except by God. And so if there's a little bit of an ancillary reference here, one of the things this is getting at is, even though these are terrible and terrifying and wicked forces that are coming up that seem to be taking over everything, at the end of the day, they are still God's beasts. John.
It's just a slight connection, maybe to Genesis chapter 12, where God says that Abraham's descendants will be as the numbered as the sands of the sea and the stars. Isn't there also an inference that shows that the beast comes up from out of the midst of the people on the earth?
It's possible, and I would not say no. I'm trying to think. I don't think I've seen any of the commentators who made that connection specifically, although that may just be the commentators that I read. But one, let's say, into the seashore.
It's also used as some of the other denominations that see as the people, comes up from out of the sea of people.
Yeah, possibly. And I mean, that'd be a good point to continue to dig on and look at in other intertextual connections. But what this does describe very, very clearly is the connection with Daniel, where you have these empires who are rising up, who are taking over. And when we look at the first beast here, we see he has 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns were 10 diadems. Now, who does that sound like? We've seen someone else who sounds almost exactly like this. Yeah, or the dragon back in chapter 12, right? So we have the dragon, which is Satan, which has 7 heads and 10 horns, and then we have this beast who comes up, and he has 7 heads and 10 horns. We're going to see who the beast is here, but what does that infer when you have these two beings? One is Satan, one is an individual, and they both look exactly the same. What inference should we draw then?
Image bearer.
Okay.
Yeah.
He is the image of his father, the devil. So he's very, very clearly a satanically inspired / oriented / imaging being. The only real difference between the two is that whereas the dragon had 7 crowns, 1 on each head, here the beast has 7 heads and 10 horns, and there's a crown on each horn. And what that would at least seem to indicate is that this beast is empowering the rulership of these other 10 beings in the same way, perhaps, that Satan is empowering the rulership of these 7 empires. So we've got some complex imagery going on, and hopefully we'll get some clarity here. But so we have the dragon, 7 heads, and 10 horns. So all these 7 empires which have been opposed to God and God's people. And then we have this beast who has 7 heads and 10 horns. So he is the same character as Satan. He is the image bearer of Satan. He is, well, what we're going to see here, especially when we look at the next beast, he is part of this unholy trinity, which involves the dragon, this beast, and then the second beast that we're going to look at. Shelley.
Okay, so all these beasts are symbols or imagery. Does that mean that when this happens, we will see an actual dragon? Like if it happened tomorrow, we would see an actual dragon or a beast, or are these symbols of a man with extreme power?
No, good question. So Satan, is he actually physically a dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns? No. But the imagery that is being pulled forward by John through the inspiration of the Spirit is such that this is the character of Satan. In some ways, like if you come up to a person and you talk with them, you're doing business, and you walk away and say, that guy's really a snake. Is he actually, forked tongue, no limbs, just slithering on the ground? No, but it's a description of his character. And John is doing something very similar. So when you see the beast, he is a man, but his character is such that he is exactly like Satan in his designs, his goals, and how he executes those goals. So good question. The description here in verse 2, actually verses 1 and 2. So the fact that he has these 10 horns, he is like a leopard, he's like a bear, he's like a lion. Where does that come from?
Daniel.
All right, Daniel chapter 7. The 4 beasts that come up out of the sea. So what do we see? We see one that's like a lion, we see one that's like a bear, and we see one that's like a leopard. And then we see a 4th that is terrifying and devastating and really bothers Daniel. Okay, so those are the four empires. Those are Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And now, so those are the four kind of in the background that are being drawn on. Now we have this beast that rises up, and he has aspects of all four. What is that getting at? What's that?
One world.
Yeah, a one world leader that encapsulates like all the worst things of Babylon, Medo Persia, Greece, and Rome. So the power and authority and grandeur of Babylon, the stability of Medo Persia, the speed and the rapidity of conquest that marked Greece, and then the absolute power that marked Rome. Those are all bundled together in one man. The beast, which, if you think about it, kind of makes sense because those empires in the past, they were inspired by Satan, inspired by Satan, inspired by Satan. And now we have this one being who is the encapsulation of everything that Satan has been trying to do up until this point. So that's what he looks like. Then we next see in your notes what he survives. So verse 3, I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and the fatal wound was healed. So one head is wounded as if slain, and the fatal wound is healed. So what is this?
It's imitating Christ.
Yes. Okay. So there's one thing that's really, really noticeable. This is a simulacrum of the resurrection. And we're going to see there's other aspects where he serves as this cheap imitation of Jesus Christ. And so here we have this head that is wounded. What does this mean? Well, we have seen that the seven heads refer to the seven empires, but we know when we look ahead a few verses that the injury is actually sustained by a person. And so what this seems to indicate is that the beast and the empire that he is driving is basically one and the same. It's like he is the one who is inspiring this empire. Yeah. Now he is injured then, wounded with the sword, we find out in verse 14. Yeah, so hold that thought for just a second because we're gonna look at Isaiah for that. But his head is injured, which it seems to infer then that the empire then is at risk, and yet then he is healed. And if we look at verses 12 and 14, it indicates that it is indeed an individual, not like the entire empire is economically collapsing or something, and all of a sudden it comes back. It's an individual who is injured. Now, what is this describing? And is there any imagery from the Old Testament that might indicate what's going on here? In Isaiah chapter 27, verse 1, we see a description of the end times. And it's describing the wrath of God that's going to fall upon the world prior to the Lord coming out of his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for iniquity. And in chapter 27, verse 1, very next section, in that day, what day? The day of God's wrath and judgment, the Lord will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan being the sea monster that is referenced in Job, with his fierce and great and mighty sword, even Leviathan, the twisted serpent, and he will kill the dragon who lives in the sea. this passage is describing what God is going to do to Satan, and yet there's this. It sounds really similar in some respects to what happens in Revelation 13, where we have this beast who comes out of the sea, and yet his head is injured by the sword. So, what this seems to be drawing from is there's this imagery of God's judgment on Leviathan, and yet the fatal wound is healed such that the whole earth worships the beast and the dragon. So it appears at first glance that this being is more powerful than God himself. Is
Tim,
fatal, yes?
so do we also, and I don't want to like
Mhm.
insert imagery, but do we also see this when the beast or, Jesus was crucified on the cross
Mm-hmm.
and then he rose from the dead? Okay, so in one way, the beast was conquered at that moment,
Uh-huh.
but not finally conquered.
Yes.
So I don't know if, I don't want to insert any imagery that's not really there, but it just feels like that's another repeat of this whole thing.
Yeah, there's definitely strong correlations here between what happens with Jesus and what happens here. And if we zoom back, and kind of the bigger point is Satan tries to look like Jesus. He wants what Jesus gets. He wants the worship Jesus gets. He wants the authority and the power that Jesus has. He wants all that. And so what does he do? He operates looking as closely as possible. And a lot of times, and we're going to see this as we go through, a lot of times it's not like, here's truth and righteousness, and we're going to go all the way to the other end, 180 degrees. A lot of times it's like, here, let me give you this truth that looks almost like what we see in the Bible. Looks pretty close. It's just off on a few points, but it actually works better because you get praise and you get glory and you get honor instead of Jesus. And so a lot of times Satan's operations look a lot like Jesus, and we're going to see that, especially with the second beast. Julie.
About last week where Satan was cast down to earth and the children of the woman are being protected.
I personally would suggest yes. So chapter 12, like if we're having to put this on a timeline, what I would personally put this is at the 3.5 year mark of the tribulation. You have Satan cast down. You have him trying to destroy Israel, because we know from Daniel 9 that the beast breaks his covenant that he has made with Israel at the halfway mark, and then he seeks to destroy them. God supernaturally protects them. The beast is angry. The dragon is angry. And so he decides he's going to destroy everybody else who names the name of Christ. So,
Kings and kingdoms here too, like they were in Daniel, or
on the beast, yes. So the way the imagery is working here, what it seems to indicate is, so here's Satan. He empowers these 7 empires. Here's the beast. He looks just like the dragon because he is working wholeheartedly in concert with the dragon. And he is we could say in concentrated form, the hatred and the evil that drove all the 7 empires as they sought to destroy Israel. And so it's not that the beast has existed throughout all of human history. He is a man. And yet he is an echo of the evil that has gone on, that Satan has been pushing as he seeks to destroy the woman and the seed.
So if this is like the penultimate evil empire,
yes,
it's manifested in sort of a collaborative rule of 10 kingdoms.
Correct.
That these put
But we
together.
know from chapter 17 that these 10 exist to give their authority to the beast. And so we have these 10, and there's actually a lot more that we could get into with those 10 and how the beast arises and he takes over 3 and then takes authority over all of them, that frankly we just don't have time or bandwidth to get into, because we will be doing some deep dives in Daniel for quite a while.
So if each of these 10 kingdoms are represented and we know that they're Rome and the Greek and
Of the 7, yeah.
the 7,
Uh-huh.
okay. So I'm getting my numbers confused, but do those empires really aren't the same as they were back then, right now?
No, so
Those empires.
again, think here's these previous empires, and the final empire is the encapsulation of all the worst aspects of those previous empires, consolidated and concentrated in one man, as Satan makes his last great push to destroy God's people.
Yeah, I think there's some military imagery here, for, when we talk about the division of the heads and the thrones and the authorities. So it'd be, and this is a battle that's going on. So the earth is gonna be divided into, different,
Potentially different sectors that are operating, and yet they all operate to serve the beast, who is the encapsulation of everything that the dragon is. So that's kind of if you look at here's the authority structure, the operational structure. That's how it plays out.
But Tim, when we say beast, we're talking about a man. When we say kingdoms, we're talking about nations or empires.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds really fictional right now using the language, but you're talking about governments and all of the authorities and powers that would be under governments, such as our own, with an individual that you could say is equivalent to, we have presidents.
Yeah,
others
something
have
like that.
kings. Like, so it's not, we're just talking about politics.
Mm-hmm. We're talking about a political system, but we're going to see with the second beast that it involves. It's inseparable from the religious aspects. So politics and religion are going together very, very closely here. And a lot more that we could say there, but gonna have to stay disciplined here. So the fatal wound is healed. The whole earth then worships the beast and the dragon, saying, who is like the beast and who is able to wage war with them? And that's a logical question, right? If you try to kill this guy and he just resurrects a few days later, there's not a lot of ability to make war against him. So this seems to be this indomitable power that no one can stand against. And again, like what the believer looks at in Jesus Christ and sees, this is what the world is looking at the beast, and they are saying, okay, I want to align myself with him because I want that type of power, because no one can make war with him. And because of that, you have the world looking at him, in essence, assuming that he is more powerful than God himself. Not even God himself can destroy this beast. So I align with him. And again, as Shelley pointed out, this is a simulacrum of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. There's identical language here as Revelation 5:6. So in Revelation 5:6, you have this lamb who approaches the throne, a lamb, and literally the Greek is as slain. Here we have the beast, and verse 3, So one of this says as slain. Now your translation probably has as if it had been slain, but literally is just as slain. And so the language harkens back to Jesus, what he accomplished. And so here's the beast assuming for himself the glory that is due to Jesus Christ by doing a mimicry of the same thing. That's all Satan can do. He's never creative. All he can do is mimic and distort. But then we see some additional parallels between the beast and Christ. And Osborne highlights a lot of these. But both of them are related in some way to swords. Jesus Christ having the sword coming out of his mouth. This individual who's injured through the sword, but has the ability to make war and to kill with the sword, verse 10. Both of them have followers with their names written on their foreheads. So Jesus Christ has his people with their names with his name on their foreheads. The beast, we're going to see, has his people with his name on their foreheads. Both of them have horns. Both of them are slain. Both of them are resurrected to new authority over. Both of them have the phrase every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. And both of them are universally worshipped. So again, Satan is basically duplicating Jesus Christ in the beast, trying to deceive as many people as he can. And we'll get to this in the application piece, but just because something looks or masquerades as Christian does not mean it's Christian. We'll see that when we get to the second beast. But that's what he does, or what he endures. What does he then say? He is given authority to speak blasphemies against God for 42 months. And specifically, take a look in verse 5. It's not that he assumed this authority, it's that there was given to him a mouth, speaking arrogant words and blasphemies. An authority to act for 42 months was given to him. So as believers in this time, like put yourself in that situation and you're looking and you're seeing this man who is the encapsulation of evil, who is setting himself up as God, who is speaking blasphemies, who is doing evil, who is afflicting God's people. What would the temptation be as you're watching this? Perhaps to say something like, is evil running rampant out of control? Is this ever going to end? Is God himself powerful enough to end this one who apparently died and was resurrected? And yet in verse 5, it tells us, here's behind the scenes. Yes, he has a mouth of speaking blasphemies. That was given to him. By whom? By God. He has authority for 42 months. Who gave him that authority? It was given to him by God. And this imagery, which again pulls from Daniel chapter 7 and verse 8, where you have this little horn that arises and speaks blasphemous things and goes to war against the saints and oppresses them. Yet we can look at this and say, yeah, he does all that. And that is terrible. And that's horrible. And yet that's given to him by God. So he thinks he is autonomous. He thinks he has full authority. He thinks his power comes from Satan. He thinks that through this he can stand against God, not even realizing that the very air that he breathes, the very mouth he uses, was given to him by God. And the authority that he exercises as the worst being who has ever walked the face of the earth in terms of power and authority and using that to try to oppose God's people, he has that authority because God gave it to him. Which, just as a side note, should that then be an encouragement to us when we look around and we see evil that seems to be unrestrained, and we see evil men who seem to have ascended into positions of authority, and they seem to want nothing more to do than evil, and they seem to like never die. It's like they're in their 80s, and they're like, how are you still alive? And still pushing evil agendas. And we look at that and go, this gives us the framework to think about those, because if it's true of the worst man, the Antichrist, and his authority, is it not then true for everybody lesser than him? That their mouth, their blasphemies, their authority is still given to them by God. And so then, rather than sitting there going, oh my goodness, I can't believe that this is happening, I can't believe God is allowing this, why in the world do God, he should not be there, she should not be doing that, like, this is terrible for you and your church and your people. Yeah, they have that authority because it was given to them by God, and it is limited by God. And there will come a time when, like the Antichrist, they will be judged as well. And then the kingdom will be given over to God's people. But that time is not yet. Shelley, did you have a question?
It says here that he's only gonna have his authority though for 42 months.
Yep, that 3.5-year period.
So that's, again, that's the 42 months that keeps being repeated.
Yep.
Is that the same 42 months we've been hearing about?
Yes, and I think what John is doing here is he's hitting that just to drive home, this is the same period of time. So to help kind of chronologically lock you into what are we looking at. So 42 months, 1,260 days, times and half a time. So there are Old Testament reference that he's pulling in for some of those usages, but he is also using that to help you understand. This is talking about a specific historical time-bound period of time that he will have authority, and at the end of that time, he is no longer going to have authority, which is really helpful if you're going through that period of time. Then we look at, what does he do? This beast who is in opposition to God. Verse 6. He opens his mouth in blasphemies against God, blaspheme his name and his tabernacle. John, what do you mean by his tabernacle? That is, those who dwell in heaven. So those whose citizenship is in heaven. Verse 7, so in addition to the blasphemies, verse 7 is given to him to make war with the saints. So he's going to oppose all those who name the name of Christ. And then, very next phrase, and to overcome them. Meaning, it is going to look like, from a human perspective, from all intents and purposes, that Satan is winning. And that God's people are suffering, and that if you align with Jesus, you are on the loser's team.
If this would be the tribulation.
Yeah, I would argue that this here properly is talking about the tribulation, specifically the last half of the tribulation, that 3.5-year period. But at the same time, is this just a, let's forecast what's going to happen in the future? No, because what's true here is true in a somewhat smaller form or somewhat lesser form throughout all of history. If you align with Jesus, are you on the winner's team, the powerful team, the team that is moving empires and shaping geopolitical forces? No. With very, very few exceptions. Most of the time, if you're a Christian, you're on the loser's team. And it seems like evil is winning. And even when it seems like good is starting to win, inevitably it starts splintering and fragmenting, and bad things start happening, and you get self-centered leaders who just desire power for themselves. And then it seems like the whole movement goes south. And so what we see that's true in and around life today That's the character of what's taking place here in a much more concentrated version. But it's the same thing that's been true throughout all of human history, which is why this is such an encouragement, again, to the seven churches who are being oppressed, who are being persecuted, who are suffering, it's like, I became a Christian and I realized that Joel Osteen is wrong, and I realized that I'm not going to, but couldn't I get a little bit of a break? It seems like my unbelieving neighbors are doing so well, and I feel like I'm suffering just because I'm a Christian. And the takeaway that those churches were supposed to take from this passage, the takeaway that we are supposed to take from this passage is that, yes, that's true throughout all of human history. You align with Jesus, you will look like a loser. You align with the beast, it's going to look like you're on the winning team, but that's only what it seems to be, because the Bible does not end at Revelation 13. Shelley.
So during the time that this was written,
Mm-hmm.
was there anybody on earth that looked like this to them? Just a leader, a world leader that had this much power or seeming to have this much power?
Yeah, so there were individuals who we could call prototypes of this. Antiochus the Great, Antiochus the Fourth, was one about 200 years before Christ, where he oppressed the Jewish people for 3.5 years. So,
But this wasn't talking about
but
that.
this is not talking about him,
How do
but
we know?
because this is yet to come. And Antiochus was a couple centuries in the past, but he operates a lot like Antiochus did. And you also have Nero, who has recently passed at the time of this writing. And Nero has tremendously persecuted Christians. And again, if you're a Christian, it seems like you're a loser. If you throw the incense to the emperor, it seems like you're on the winning team and you're economically prosperous, and you have everything you want and more. So what do you want? Everything the world has to offer, or to be a loser for Jesus? Easy choice, right? And this pulls back the curtain and shows you, but what's actually happening? Yeah, Antiochus may have had power. Yes, Nero may have power. Yes, Diocletian at this point currently holds power. But who gave them their power? Just as a thought experiment for you seven churches. Who gave them that power? It's God. So are you going to align with Satan? And by the way, seven churches, we're going to get to the end. You're going to see chapter 19, chapter 20, what happens to them, what happens to the beast, what happens to the false prophet, what happens to the dragon. We're going to see everyone who aligns with them, what happens. So take heart, take courage. Don't become discouraged because it seems like Satan is winning, because that's what's supposed to happen. We see that right here in verse 7. Verse 8, all who dwell on the earth will worship him. Well, that's encouraging. So if you don't worship him, the entire world is going to be against you. Yeah. Everyone's going to worship him. Here's the caveat. Everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. So that's the critical caveat. Yes, you can align with the beast. Yes, you can serve him. Yes, you can be economically prosperous and you can have everything that your heart desires. But if you do that, if you worship him, you are one of the individuals whose name has not been written in the Lamb's book of life. Your time will end when the beast ends. So the world worships him, but it's to their own destruction, and that's what's critical for the churches to understand.
Tim, a significant number of Protestants have viewed this as fulfilled in the Pope. To Shelley's question, I know hers was in the time of John's writing. But
yeah, and so subsequently, yeah, you have the Pope arise and individuals saying, well, he is the Antichrist. Which is he an Antichrist? Certainly. Is he the one who is described here? I would say no, because there's a whole bunch the description that does not match the Pope. But to what we're talking about with verses 9 and 10, what is the saint's response to be? First of all, if anyone has an ear, let him hear. You know, we saw that in chapters 2 and 3 with every single church. He who has an ear to hear, let him hear. Why does John plug this in here? It's so that as you're sitting there as one of the 7 churches and you're hearing, oh, this is what's supposed to take place in the future. No, if you have an ear to hear, hear. This applies to you. This is not for some 2,000 plus years in the future.
What's so confusing to me right now is that this book was written and to those churches about
Mhm.
something that's gonna happen. So.
Yeah, like 2,000 years in the future.
Like we haven't, like, so according to what you're saying, this tribulation thing hasn't happened yet. Some people think it has happened.
Yeah, which
And that it
if
happened back in AD 70 when.
Mhm. Yeah, and
Rome was destroyed.
they can argue that, but that's fairly easy to say, no, that's not the case because first of all, has Jesus returned? No, that's why full preterism is heretical. Is it true that there has been this being who has risen up and taken over the entire world, and that we have seen everything from the entire ocean turning blood, all the green thing on Earth being destroyed, the sun, moon, and stars being blocked out, and then becoming torching everybody in the bulges? Like that has not happened yet, and there's no way you can look at any point in history.
Isn't that like, I mean, that language, isn't that, and I'm not
Mhm.
I'm not trying to be argumentative, but
Sure.
I get confused about like language that is hyperbole, descriptive,
Mhm.
imagery, not literal. Are you saying that these things literally have to happen? Like the
In terms of the
this thing will
judgments,
literally turn to blood, or is it, couldn't it be a description about using language that sort of makes it seem like it's so bad, it's as if the sea was turned to blood, it's as if the sun was all, the stars blotted, you know what I mean?
yeah.
Like,
And
how do you know it's not just
my
descriptive?
question, yeah, my question would be, certainly he's using a lot of descriptive language, but he is describing actual physical events. So when it says a third of the sea creatures die, what does that mean? When it says a third of humanity dies, what does that mean?
So we have to take it at its word and say, okay,
Mhm.
it says a third, so therefore.
Yeah.
It must mean literally what it says.
Mhm. And so what we have then is this description of the very end and pulling back the curtain of here's what happens at the very end of all this. This is the character of the war that's taking place. This is the character of evil. This is the character of the saints as they persevere. So that's what's true in the very end. Now, if you have an ear to hear, you're going to see that what you're seeing there, you're going to see it in a somewhat smaller or somewhat lesser degree. You're going to see those same tendrils in your life today. You're going to see the same character of evil in the interactions that you have with the Roman government.
I think
But-
you need to look back to history at that point and see, like when you're talking about the plagues of Egypt, which God did.
Yeah.
These aren't like completely novel. They're just like next level versions of
Yeah.
the same.
And
same
what
God
took place?
Same yesterday, today, and
Yeah. What took place in Egypt? Did that physically actually occur? Did the Nile actually turn to blood? Did frogs actually come out? Did we can go through every single one. Yes, those literally, actually, historically, physically occurred. And so then when John takes it up to, here's the ultimate encapsulation of that, all the seas turn to blood. All the fresh water is gone. A third of the people die. The sun, moon, and stars are blocked out, and then does that actually literally happen? Yes.
Tim, to Shelley's question regarding the use of language, which does employ images. Like
Mhm.
still, what I think I hear you saying is you're asking the question, even if imagery is used, it is used to refer to an actual event,
Historical.
which means
Yeah.
you're not. I don't hear you saying it therefore must be literal. Does Jesus literally show up on a white horse? Does Jesus have a sword come out of his mouth and kill everyone?
Mhm.
Like you would say, what I hear you saying is those are images that are used to describe the literal event of Jesus's return and the judgment that he executes.
Mhm.
Is that so?
Yes.
White horse or tongue sword?
Is that literal?
So let's take the sword, and I'm going to have to shut down questions if we're going to get to the chapter, because we're running tight on time here. But if we're talking about something like the sword coming out of Jesus' mouth, do we have Old Testament reference for that help us understand what does that mean?
God
Yes.
is a sword?
Yes, the sword of the Spirit. Jesus slaying his enemies with the sword. And so we can say, okay, what that is describing is not that he's walking around with the sword hanging out of his mouth, but that it is through the word of his mouth that he is destroying, because his word is the sword. The sword of the Spirit is the word of God. So we can look at that and say, okay, that is a vivid description of the fact that Jesus is using his mouth to destroy all who stand against him, literally, physically, actually, historically. When it says he comes back on a white horse, is it possible that he physically comes back on a white horse? Sure. I mean,
the horse's bridles.
Yeah. So we can look at that, and there's a certain extent where we can say, is this drawing from the Old Testament to help us understand something, or is this actually occurring? But the actual occurrence is very, very clear. Jesus is physically returning and then destroying his enemies, and that's the imagery that's described. Is there physically going to be the judgments that are poured out where it's like you step outside and you go, there are 100-pound hailstones falling and killing people? Yes. And that's historically been the imagery of God's judgment on his people through hailstones. We see that all through the Bible. So the fact that there's imagery, the fallacy can be there's some symbolic imagery. Therefore, none of this actually literally happens. It's just all kind of generally there's good versus evil and good wins. No, there is objective propositional truth that is being communicated with imagery to support that. And that's where this is challenging, because we have to do a lot of work in the Old Testament. But it provides a much sharper picture of what's going on than if it just said, and Jesus came back and a whole bunch of really bad things happened and a lot of people died, and then Jesus returned and everything was okay. The Old Testament imagery enriches what we see in the book of Revelation and helps us understand what he's doing.
Well, for clarification.
Sure.
Aren't there some dispensationalists like people from Dallas and others who believe these things that will actually be 100-pound hail? The moon will turn to blood.
Yeah.
There
I mean,
are people who believe that way. Not that I do, but
that there's actually going to be 100-pound hailstones. Yes, I 100% believe there are actually going to be 100-pound hailstones that are falling. I actually believe there's going to be a time when you step outside and go, the moon looks blood red. I believe there's actually going to be a time when you look out and if you go to the beach, you go, this looks like coagulated blood.
And the dragon's tail will knock stars out of the sky to the earth.
Well, we talked about what that could mean. So that could be imagery pulling the stars that are described in Genesis of the tribes of Israel and the destruction that the dragon is implementing against God's people. But there we have a clue because John says, and I saw a sign in heaven. So he lets us know this is not actually necessarily a literal historical event, but this is a description of what he's doing symbolically. So I realize we could chase this, and I'll tell you, I'm time limited for working through this, in part because of the hour and in part because we'll be announcing this morning. I'm going to be out for a while starting in mid-October because of some Marine Corps issues. So what I'd like to do is get this finished before I leave.
Don't leave us hanging.
So yeah, we'll get to chapter 18 and it's like, okay, sorry, we're done here. So let's walk through a couple of things real quick. So the saints are to hear because the lessons are applicable to the church now, even as it takes place in the future. And how is perseverance and faith demonstrated? Verse 10, if anyone is for captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. This is the perseverance and the faith of the saints. So what is this getting at here? For the believer, how do you demonstrate faith and perseverance in the midst of everything that's being described? Answer, it is by when you are arrested for your faith, rather than going, oh my goodness, I can't believe this is actually happening. How could this happen to me? I was just exercising my First Amendment rights. Instead, embracing the persecution that comes and saying, Lord, I trust you in the midst of this, because at worst, this is only going to last 3.5 years. Less than that if you're arrested later. And if anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. That's imaging how is the response then, all right, Christians, we're going to band together, get your AR-15s together. We are going to fight off the beast, and we're going to try to do everything we can to establish a mini Christian nation right here. We're going to do this thing. No, if anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Perseverance and faith shows itself by saying, this is what God has allotted, and I'm going to embrace it and be a faithful witness in the midst of it. That's perseverance and faith.
So no fighting back, huh?
Not in this context, no.
Well, is that what it's teaching, or is it just teaching that if God has appointed you for this particular death through persecution, then you'll be faithful to suffer the death God has appointed?
Certainly that's true, and that would be the first part of it, but it says if anyone kills with the sword he must be killed, which would indicate what is the response of the believer to be. Is it take up the sword and start fighting against the beast? Well, if you do that with the sword, you must be killed. But rather embracing the suffering that comes, knowing that it is for a brief period of time, and that at the end, the kingdom transfers over to you regardless.
Yeah,
So it's
as
like,
far as questions of pacifism versus non-pacifism.
yeah, which we could tease this out a whole lot more. And what does that mean? Does that mean a Christian shouldn't serve in the military? Well, obviously not. I would not hold to that. But is the response in persecution to be, I'm going to fight and we're going to win? It's like, no, stupid. Look, it's only 3.5 years. And then, like, everything you're fighting, you're not going to get it during that 3.5 years because it's been given to him to overcome you. And at the end of those 3.5 years, what happens? The kingdom is given to you anyway. So why are you even fighting? It doesn't make any sense. That's perseverance and faith. Real quick. Second beast. So another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, sounds like Jesus, and he spoke as a dragon. That's how you know the enemy. How he speaks, not what he looks like. He exercises all the authority of the first beast. In the presence of the first beast, he makes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose fatal wound was healed. He performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down out of heaven to earth in the presence of men. So he's able to look like he has the power of God, does signs. He also deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which was given to him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who had the wound of the sword and had come to life. Similar to Nebuchadnezzar, how he raises up the image that the entire earth is supposed to worship. And it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast. Where have we seen that before? So that the image of the beast would even speak and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. So this image appears to have life because the second beast has given life to him. So there's a simulacrum of creation. See, I can resurrect, I can create, I am God. And he causes all of the small and the great, the rich and the poor and the free and the slaves to be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead, which is exactly what Jesus has done to his people. And he provides that no one would be able to buy and sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. So again, there's the imagery there of you will not engage in economic discourse unless you have taken the oath of loyalty to the beast and the world system that he empowers. So you either worship God, or you either worship the beast, or you face death. Again, even this is a simulacrum. You either worship God, or you face eternal death. And Satan takes that same idea. Okay, you either worship me, or you face physical death. So in every way, he is trying to look like Jesus, but to lead people astray. You're to take a mark of loyalty to Satan, either on your forehead or on your hand. Is there anywhere in Scripture where we've seen something about putting something on your forehead or your hand? If you're Deuteronomy 6, if you're a Jewish person, what do you have? You have the phylacteries either on your forehead or on your hand. Why do you do that? Because this is my reminder of whose I am, and my loyalty is to his. And Satan takes that and he pulls out another simulacrum. You take my loyalty and your allegiance is to me.
So people think that they're pledging allegiance to God, but they're not.
They think they are pledging allegiance to a godlike being, yes, who is going to give them everything they wanted. And then we come to the last verse, probably the most debated verse. Here's wisdom. Let him who understands calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. What is 666? First of all, what is it not? It's not some sort of magic talisman. It's not some sort of unlucky number like, I was parking in the parking lot, and then I saw a parking space that was 666, and I didn't stop there. Then I went to 667. Like, no, that's not what this is. And it's not, some people are like, if you take Caesar Nero, or you take Hitler, or, and you do all these things to it, and eventually you get 666. It's like, no, that's not what that is. So what is it? Well, 7 is associated with God. Jesus has 7 horns. There are the 7 spirits of God. Jesus is described as having 7 eyes. 6 is associated with man. Man was created on day 6. He's supposed to work 6 days, with day 7 going to God. The image in Daniel 3 is 6 cubits wide and 60 cubits tall. So what's going on here? Satan always tries to imitate God, but he always falls short. And so in the same way that the believer has the name of God, the perfect one, written on his forehead, Satan and the beast desire that same worship, but they always fall short. Thus, to God's 7, Satan can only offer us 6, if we put it that way. I'm going to hold off on questions just to get through the last piece here, and then may have time for 1 or 2 questions at the end. So at the end, 666 is a clear expression of allegiance to Satan and the beast. So, final application, real quick. The worst demons are, in the end, God's demons. They do nothing apart from his permission. Secondly, we see all over this chapter, Satan tries to look as much like God as possible so that he deceives people. So as believers, we must be discerning. It's not what a person looks like. It is what they communicate, what they say. Is this biblical? Is this aligned with apostolic doctrine? And then for the 7 churches, if you're facing affliction because you're serving Jesus Christ, this gives a wonderful picture of what's actually going on. That is to be expected. Okay. Gone long. Slam the plane. If you have any questions, feel free to bring them up afterwards. So thank you for your patience and your questions and engagement. There's a lot of really, really good questions. So I appreciate that.